I was at the Democrat convention in 2000, and Bill Clinton was called up to give a speech. And he was somewhere in sub-basement level 12, near the parking garage. And the walk to the stage, I think, was something like 7.8 miles. And the last time I'd seen any guy do something like that was Tom Jones at Vegas. But Bill Clinton, the roar of approval as he walked over the 7.8 miles of tunnels lasted until he got to the podium. And I'm sad that in my present decrepitude, I fell just a little bit short at the steps here. But I thank Larry very much for his kind remarks. I treasure all the time I've spent at Hillsdale, and it was lovely to hear the choir again. I was there for the dedication of the chapel, and the choir sang Sir Hubert Parry. I was glad when they said unto me, which I generally think of as a bit Anglican for Hillsdale's taste, but in fact it filled that chapel absolutely beautifully, and it's one of many happy memories I have of Hillsdale. I'm delighted to be here. My lawyer, Chris Bartolomucci, is somewhere around here. Where? Oh, there he is, yeah. As is my dear friend Michelle Buckman, who is here. Hi, Michelle. She's known to you all. And she came to my trial every day at the DC Superior Court, and I shall be grateful till the day I die for that. As most of you probably know, lawyers don't like it when clients talk about the case in public because it can cause problems with the judge. You've heard that, right? I'd never heard it till Chris mentioned it to me about an hour before dinner, and I'd already written my speech by that point. And I'm hopeless at ad-libbing, so it was too late to change. Before getting on to the case, let me make a general observation or two. Any constitution has to inhabit the same reality as the society it governs. And in that sense, the US Constitution and US reality in the 21st century are diverging significantly. One of the two people who will be president in January is being shot at on a regular basis. And if you were watching TV on Sunday or Monday, you'll know that it barely makes the news. Attempted assassination is being normalized. As you know, the present Chief Justice has a preference for steering clear of intervention in anything controversial, which preference in itself becomes a form of intervention. The increasing lethargy of the courts piles up an awful lot of damage. Right now, across the country, school administrators and medical institutions are permitting sad, confused middle school girls to be physically mutilated and rendered infertile without even the say-so of their parents. That's evil. That is evil, and it is as evil as anything the Chaykoms, the Russians, the Ayatollahs are doing to their peoples. Yet for the moment it goes on, day after day, schoolgirl after schoolgirl. And by the time the court ever agrees to address it, who's to say some rock-ribbed originalist won't have, quote, grown in office, as my fellow granite stater David Souter so famously did, and there'll be a 5-4 majority willing to torture the language of the Constitution into discovering a hitherto unknown right for minors to have their private parts experimented on. That's a general observation, and I make it as someone who comes from an entirely different constitutional tradition. I don't know, how many of you here have ever read the Canadian Constitution? Wow. The sound of one hand clapping. Seek medical treatment. The 1867 Canadian Constitution says in Section 3, Paragraph 9, Executive power is vested in the Queen. That's Queen Victoria, now it's King Charles. And then a couple of sentences down it says, Her Majesty shall be advised from time to time by the Queen's Privy Council for Canada. And that's it. There's no mention of a government with a majority in the House of Commons, no mention of any such position as Prime Minister in the Canadian Constitution. There's no mention of any such person as Prime Minister in the Australian Constitution of 1901 or in most of the other Commonwealth constitutions that followed over the next 100 years. 1962, Constitution of Jamaica. The executive authority of Jamaica is vested in Her Majesty. 20 years later, 1981, Constitution of Belize. The executive authority of Belize is vested in Her Majesty. We all know there's a little more to it than that, but that's understood rather than stated, because in the end, all functioning constitutions require a virtuous people. L'État, c'est moi, said Louis XIV. The state is me. And as a matter of fact, as a matter of law, he's quite correct. That's simply the case in a monarchy, in the form of which states have been created for most of human history. So, as fact, as law, l'état, c'est moi, is the beginning and end of it. In America, facts are more conditional, they're interpreted, and a land of laws has degenerated into a land of legalisms. Right now, free speech is dying across the West. It's dying in Canada and the rest of His Majesty's dominions. It's dying in Europe. And despite the constitutional protections of the First Amendment, it's dying in America. 2 nights ago, Hillary Clinton was on TV calling for Americans to be jailed for, quote, disinformation, which means anything she and the ruling class happen to disagree with. She wants you in a cell for disagreeing with the official version. And she's a lawyer. So presumably this constitution thingy came up once or twice when she was in law school. Across the river from me in New Hampshire, a 4th generation family farm in Vermont's Lake Champlain Islands has been sent a letter from the town of North Hero saying the political signs on the farm's roadside fields are in breach of a town ordinance that restricts the number of political signs to 2 unless you get and you pay for a permit from the town clerk. The signs are for local Republican candidates in the state legislature. The North Hero town clerk happens to be married to the Democrat incumbent. So as in the Trump cases, as in the January 6th cases, as in Peter Navarro's cases, Peter is sitting just here, the ruling party is using the law against its only political opposition. That North Hero town ordinance strikes me as pretty obviously unconstitutional, but if you're a small Vermont farmer, as with the fishermen on the Great Lakes, getting a ruling on that will eat up all of your money and much of your life. In Vermont, as in Quebec, as in Ireland, as in Germany, we have all come to the same point. So I'm not making any claims to superiority for any system, because right now the big story is that the entirety of Western civilization is sliding off the cliff, and most citizens of Western nations aren't even aware of that. Without course correction, the future will be made elsewhere. As China sees it, a freak half-millennium blip of Euro-American dominance is coming to an end, and the world is returning to its natural order. And if you're going off the cliff, it doesn't really matter whether you land in the heap of rubble at the bottom as a constitutional republic like America, as a constitutional monarchy like Canada, or as a monarchical republic like France is. We've all arrived at the cliff edge simultaneously, and if Western civilization dies on America's watch, Historians are not going to be writing about the American Constitution. I'll make another big point that it's a cheap point, but I think it has validity, that at a certain level, as we're about to see in November, there's no point having the best constitution in the world if you have the worst and most corrupt voting system, certainly in the developed world and by comparison with much of the developing world too. What goes on in Georgia and Pennsylvania would not be approved by Jimmy Carter if he were monitoring an election in Chad or Botswana. But apparently that's just the way it is in Pennsylvania, in Georgia. And with that, let me turn to the subject of tomorrow's events, which is lawfare. I don't like the word. I had it bandied about when the Canadian Islamic Congress had a go at me in 3 different jurisdictions over 15 years ago. It was inadequate then, and it's inadequate now. What's happening here is the abolition of equality before the law, without which you cannot have constitutional government of any kind. My case in the District of Columbia Superior Court is now in its 13th year. It began in 2012. For those of you under 40, 50, that was in Barack Obama's first term. He's now in his, what, 3rd term, 4th term? So it was a long time ago. It was over a 270-word post at National Review in which I called the climate activist Michael Mann's global warming hockey stick, which, if you don't remember, it covered the last 1,000 years of climate, and it showed nothing happening for 900 years. And then your grandfather climbed into the first prototype SUV, and there's the blade of the hockey stick shooting up the top right-hand corner of the graph, and we're all going to die. I called it, quote-unquote, fraudulent. I've been calling it fraudulent ever since it was first published a quarter century ago in national newspapers in the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, South Africa, all the way down to the local paper Hawke's Bay Today in New Zealand. Anyone here from Hawke's Bay? Pity, because when the powder keg goes up, that's not a bad place to flee to. I never got sued over the fraudulence of Mr. Mann's graph in London, Toronto, Sydney, Johannesburg, or even Hawke's Bay, until I did that post at National Review. And I cannot believe the men who wrote the First Amendment intended that Americans should enjoy fewer free speech rights than territories which remained within the British Empire. So I called the hockey stick fraudulent in National Review, and Michael Mann sued me for defamation. He testified at trial that he hasn't paid a penny in legal fees since this suit was filed in 2012. So he's being bankrolled by Big Climate or George Soros or whoever it is, which means that, as they say in the vernacular, he has no skin in the game, whereas my skin is the game. He's a mere sock puppet for whoever's funding the waggling. But still in all, he venue shopped very well. He doesn't live or work in the District of Columbia. I don't live or work in the District of Columbia. But I thought if they were so eager to take the case, they'd be capable of litigating a 4-paragraph blog post in, say, 4 months. We're now in the 13th year, so they can't litigate a 4-paragraph blog post in... Oh, sorry, Chris, is this the bit mocking and sneering at the incompetent DC courts you wanted me to take out? Okay, just a minute. Apparently there doesn't seem to be anything other than mocking and sneering at the DC courts. So Chris, if you want to come up and sing vocal selections from Les Miserables till the... we are currently on our 5th trial, Judge. Hold that thought. Quote, 5th trial, Judge, is a phrase that does not exist in functioning jurisdictions. We went to trial in DC at the beginning of this year, and we went through all the usual rituals that attend American justice. We had big, expensive jury consultants. Any jury consultants in the House? Thank God for that. Jury consultants aren't really worth bothering with if you've got a jury pool where everyone's a registered Democrat and they all tell you that their big concern is climate change, and they all tell you that they get their news from the Washington Post and NPR. In 2020, over 92% of voters in the District of Columbia voted for Biden, 5% voted for Trump. Now, I know many Americans believe the election was stolen in Pennsylvania, in Georgia, in other states, but I'm reasonably confident that the one place it wasn't stolen was the District of Columbia. Biden, 92%, Trump, 5%. Biden, 92%, Trump, 5%. For purposes of comparison, 2008 Zimbabwean election, Robert Mugabe a mere 90%, 2 points less than Biden. He was furious about it. 1996 Iraqi parliamentary elections, Saddam Hussein's Ba'ath Party, 64% of the vote. 2005 Egyptian presidential election, Hosni Mubarak, 88% of the vote. Mr. Mubarak, bless him, had complained after the previous election that 93% was too skewed. It made him look like one of those joke dictators. It made him a laughingstock. It was embarrassing when he went to UN General Assembly summits, whereas the sweet spot was to be one of the semi-credible dictator types. So he asked the election riggers to lower it to below 90%. He didn't want any District of Columbia type result getting in there. Oh, one more, 2014 North Korean election, Kim Jong-un, 100%. The District of Columbia, Joe Biden, 92%. Not quite as popular as Kim Jong-un, but more popular than Mugabe, Mubarak, Saddam Hussein. So Michael Mann's lawyer knew what he was doing in the very last remarks of the trial. The very last, because in a quite disgraceful perversion of common law norms, in DC and too many other American jurisdictions, the accused does not get the last word, but the accuser does. So Mann's counsel compared the defendants being climate deniers to Trump and the January 6th guys being election deniers. And he invited the jury to send a message that attacks on scientists have to stop. Oh, just by the by, inviting a jury to send a message rather than the actual case in front of them is unconstitutional. The Supreme Court has so ruled. We objected, and the somewhat ineffectual judge upheld the objection, but permitted Mann's lawyer to buffalo his way through. So the jury came back and found me liable and awarded Mr. Mann actual damages of $1 because he had been unable to prove any damage to himself, save that someone once gave him a mean look in the aisles of Wegmans supermarket. He said that was because of me. We don't even have Wegmans in New Hampshire. I'd been in a Wegmans, and I would kill for a Wegmans in my... We don't have it. Yet he's like flouncing around Wegmans every other day and figures his low reputation there is because of someone who's only set foot in a Wegmans once. I don't know whether it was because of what I'd written. I suggested in court it might have been because Mann had just grabbed the last box of vegan granola or whatever. But anyway, I was liable for $1 in actual damages and then another $1 million in punitive damages. That was because the $1 million was because of one exchange when I was in the witness box. Mann's lawyer asked me if it was true that I had spent many years as a guest host for Rush Limbaugh on the EIB network and for Tucker Carlson on Fox News. And I answered truthfully. And in a jurisdiction where Democrats win by higher margins than anyone but Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang, that answer cost me $1 million. We're in basic Bolshevist territory here, as formulated by Lenin and Trotsky a century ago. Whom? Once you know which of the protagonists belongs to the approved group and which to the reviled group, all the rest is just going through the motions. Justice is impossible for Donald Trump and for me. Tell you one other thing about the case too. We had a six-man jury. Six-man jury. You know, that's like some low-budget version of 12 Angry Men. Would you go and see that great film, by the way? Would you go and see it if it was 4 Angry Men? I don't think so. The big shot jury consultants were all excited because juror number 9 was rumored to be a moderate Republican. Some Susan Collins, Jim Jeffords, Liz Cheney type. In fact, all 10 jurors stuck with it until the end. So as they sat for the entire trial, we asked if all 10 could adjudicate the case. Mann objected, so it was denied. I don't consider 6 people to be a jury. In fact, the judge wanted to shrink it to 5 and sent a round-robin email to that effect that chanced to come through to me directly rather late at night. So 45 seconds later, I emailed back somewhat intemperately, "A jury of 5 is not acceptable to this defendant. 5 isn't a jury, it's a bridge party plus someone to refill the drinks." The first requirement of a jury trial is a jury, but not in the District of Columbia. Mr. Bartolomucci here filed an immediate post-trial motion in early February, but the judge has ruled on neither that nor any of the other post-trial motions 7 months later. In functioning court systems, 7 months is the time it takes to file the suit, to try the suit, to determine the winner, and to put the loser up against the wall with a blindfold, which frankly I would have preferred. Almost 20 years ago, I used the following phrase to describe the Canadian human rights suits against me: the process is the punishment. It's since spread south of the border, as Peter Navarro and Michael Flynn and many others can tell you. General Flynn eventually, quote unquote, won in court, but by then the fruits of a lifetime's labor were wiped out. Peter Navarro, who is one of the happiest of happy warriors, was on my TV show in the UK. I think it was just last year. And just before he came on, he asked me off air if I could plug his book, as he was hoping to use his book royalties to pay his legal bills. And the commercial break ended before I could tell him that unless you're J.K. Rowling, there is no amount of book royalties that can cover protracted litigation in the American courts. He's done a Harry Potter sequel that he's trying to pitch. So I'm no longer even sure the process is the punishment quite covers that quite covers it. It's more like a new American version of trial by ordeal. As some of you will know, in medieval times, trial by ordeal meant you had to prove your innocence by, say, walking barefoot over red-hot plowshares. It happened to the consort of both Ethelred the Unready and any Ethelred the Unready fans in the house. Oh no, that's a bit like Hawke's Bay, New Zealand. It happened to the consort of both Ethelred the Unready and King Canute, Queen Emma of, at various times, England, Denmark and Norway. In the 13th century, she was accused of having an affair with the Bishop of Winchester. and made to walk over 9 red-hot plowshares. To reprise that bit of American vernacular, unlike Michael Mann, Queen Emma had skin in the game. And she, quote unquote, won. And that is American trial by ordeal today. You prove your innocence, but at the end, you're a charred, smoking lump, and so's your career and so's your savings account. Lawyers understand this. It's no coincidence that the first people to fold in the Trump Georgia suit, the first to say guilty Miller, the first to cop a plea, were various Trump lawyers, Sidney Powell, Kenneth Cheeseborough, Jenna Ellis, because lawyers know that under American trial by ordeal, if you win, you lose. Unlike almost any other part of the world, American justice is ruinous. It's not just a fine, it's not just some small legal bills and then you get on with your life. It's ruinous, it consumes your life. And when there's no equality before the law, that means it's just consuming one side's life. If you're a Black Lives Matter guy and you torch a government building in Tim Walz's Minnesota, you don't go to jail, and Kamala Harris and her Hollywood chums will post your bail. But if you're a little old law-abiding grandma in a MAGA hat and you don't torch a government building, you simply amble aimlessly around in it for an hour or two after the Capitol Police have unlocked the doors and ushered you in, you'll be jailed for 3 years. And so after 12 years in the dank-feeted, clogged septic tank of DC justice, a lot of the things that have come up in far more prominent trials have rung a lot of bells with me. Back in 2012, DC had a new SLAPP law. SLAPP stands for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation, i.e. you sue someone to take them out of the public square, to silence them. So we objected to this case under SLAPP, and then because the SLAPP law was brand new, and like so much legislation, very poorly drafted, we had to have an interlocutory appeal to the DC Court of Appeals to address the question of whether a SLAPP ruling could be interlocutorily appealed. So an interlocutory appeal to determine whether our interlocutory appeal could in fact be interlocutorily appealed. For the non-lawyers in the room, I could explain what that means, but I'd rather stab pencils in my eyeballs. At any rate, following the Trump trial under this guy Merchan, Judge Merchan in New York this year, I suddenly realized, hang on, this is the ultimate SLAPP suit, the ultimate strategic lawsuit against public participation, the ultimate removal of a citizen from the public square. It's election year in America. One of only 2 people will become president, the Democrat or the Republican. So a Democrat judge tells the Republican candidate he has to be present in court 4 days a week. Michael Mann, in my case, wasn't present in court 4 days a week because of the demands on his highly valuable time. But a Democrat judge can prevent the Republican presidential candidate from doing any campaign events except on Wednesday. And he gets away with it because by the time John Roberts is willing to take up that issue, we'll be halfway through Tim Walz's second term. There was another moment of deja vu in the Trump New York trial. You recall that he kept complaining the courtroom was too cold, that it was an icebox and uncomfortable for him. And the judge told him, tough. It was an 80-year-old building, so it did not have sophisticated climate control. An 80-year-old building, let me see, that would be the, oh my, that's all the way back in the 1940s. Incredible. Did they have windows or roofs back then? My entire life, all over the world, I've lived in houses between 200 and 700 years old, and we managed to control the climate rather better than a 1940s building in what was then the most advanced metropolis on Earth. But oddly, the opposite happened to me in DC. The courtroom was too hot. The temperature increased every day, and by about the third or fourth day, it was a sweatbox. And the judge did nothing except agree to the door being opened, which made it a sweatbox with an open door. And I had in the previous year 3 heart attacks. And as any doctors here will know, being confined to an excessively hot environment increases your risk of a fatal heart attack. But my judge took the same attitude as Trump's judge. Hey, it's a 50-year-old building, get used to it. And it was only late one afternoon when I came close to passing out, and I roused myself to tell him that I thought you guys had a constitutional prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment, that he agreed to move it to a courtroom with a functioning thermostat. When I got back to New Hampshire, my doctor concluded that during my month in DC, I had another heart attack while I was there. But unfortunately for the plaintiff, it was a mild one. The legal scholar's attitude to all this is, oh well, in the fullness of time, what's happened to Trump and to you and to whoever's next will all get overturned by the Supreme Court. A judge's republic is a contradiction in terms. Republicans talk a lot about the importance of the Supreme Court, usually when there's an unsatisfactory candidate. Dole, McCain, Romney. Yes, I know he's not great, but we've still got to drag him over the finish line so he can appoint rock-ribbed originalists to the Supreme Court. Well, my case is in its 13th year. Going right back to the first lawyers' calls in 2012, there was talk about how the DC courts weren't very sound, so we ought to bear in mind it might wind up at the Supreme Court. But our chances there were pretty good. Do you know who was on the Supreme Court in 2012? Antonin Scalia, Anthony Kennedy, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Stephen Breyer. So there's been a 50% turnover in the judge pool since my case began. By the time we get it to the Supreme Court, who knows who'll be on it, who knows how many judges there'll be. Given the position of the current president, Joe Biden, remember him, Joe Biden? Who's to say there won't have been another similar turnover, and given his policy on expanding the court, a 6-3 conservative majority may have been replaced by a 9-6 lefty majority. What is the point of that? A system that consumes a huge percentage of your adult life and all of your savings is not justice, not at all. And that saddens me. I love America. I don't love its legal system, and I don't love a system that degenerates from a land of laws into a land of legalisms. We are now in a situation, as I began with, where the president is being shot at twice in a couple of months. And that is actually on the same continuum as this lawfare, as this trial by ordeal. If I have my dates correct, this is not actually Constitution Day, it is post-Constitution Day. And I hope that that is not becoming simply a statement of the reality we live in. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, President. And I'm happy to take a couple of questions. After the verdict, I scrammed straight to the airport and I said, I'm never setting foot in your lousy capital city again, but I have broken that for Hillsdale, so I'm happy to have a couple of questions. We must have a question. Can I?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Steyn. We now have time for questions. Please raise your hand and wait for the microphone to be brought to you.
Mark, we're beyond grateful. Do you have a legal defense fund we can contribute to?
Well, I'm not. I was slightly mocking Peter for thinking that his book royalties could fund his defense, and in my case, certainly the book royalties got eaten up years ago. The royalties on my Cat album actually did a lot of the heavy lifting for my defense. I don't think I understand people like to have legal defense funds. I'm wary of it because in two cases, in my own case, people the other side demanded to know who donated to us, wanted to know that. So they wanted to know the individuals. In another case I was in, people who had donated to the legal defense were named in an amended complaint as John and Jane Doe's number 1 to number 47 or whatever. So these people are anxious to find out who it is. You may have heard about VDare.com, the immigration restrictionist website, which was targeted by the state of New York and which basically has closed up shop. But one of the things that the Attorney General of New York is demanding are the names of all the various people who contribute to it. You have to be very, and what happens when you make a donation like that? They want to know the name so they can do to it what they did to that guy at Mozilla who donated to the anti-same-sex marriage thing in California, and it wound up costing him his job. So I'm not really I'm not happy about that. I'm not comfortable about that. And I think Peter's thing about using his book royalties is actually a very honourable thing to do. Yeah.
Mark, we're glad you're here still, in good health, or reasonably good health.
In reasonably bad health, but a little better than it was the last time I was.
Totally different topic, Palestine and Israel, your thoughts?
Well, Palestine and Israel reminds me of an intractable suit at the DC Superior Court. In fact, I think my case began round about the time the State of Israel was founded in 1948. So they have a lot in common. I think I'm always on the side of civilization against barbarism. It's as simple as that for me. And I think that's the thing. It's like, is what Hamas did on October the 7th, parachuting into the Peace and Love Festival, killing all the guys, seizing all the women, raping them until death, is that part of the same phenomenon as, say, the little girls in a park in Annecy, a town in eastern France I know very, very well, the little girls there who were stabbed they were like 6, 7, 8. They were stabbed by some guy who was a follower of Islam. Is what Hamas are doing part of the same story as that? Is it part of the same story as the little girl waiting to be picked up outside her school in Dublin who got stabbed? Is it the same story as the girl in Germany just last week who got gang raped? Yes, it is. And once there are no more Jews for these guys to kill, then they're going to kill the remaining infidels. And I don't want that to happen. But there is something that the official Jews, as my friend Ezra Levant likes to call them, were no use to me in my difficulties in Canada. The Canadian Jewish Congress made common cause with the Canadian Islamic Congress. The Anti-Defamation League thought thought what was going on in Toulouse, where there was a mass murder at the Jewish school in that town. I've been to that school. And all the synagogues had to be consolidated into one synagogue under the guard of French soldiers. The Anti-Defamation League thought that was a resurgence of neo-Nazis, or maybe just a few very old Nazis still around. They're all 112 years old, but when it comes to taking out Jews, the old skills haven't left them. It's like getting on a bicycle. It all comes instantly back. No, it wasn't. It wasn't that. It was being perpetrated by Muslim immigrants. So you can take the side of Hamas, as apparently everybody at American colleges does, but when all the Jews are dead, they're just going to come and get you. It's not difficult to pick a side here.
Very noble that there is no legal defense fund, but if you go to Steyn online, you can sign up and it'll be a rich reward because it's fun on that website. And for a time at least, if you did that, you would get a model hockey stick, which
we actually...
and I commend them to you.
I never like Larry when he's doing his My Pillow guy routine. The hockey stick, which was in fact the Steyn Online Liberty Stick, we had bits of Magna Carta and the US Constitution and things like that on there. We actually sold them out. I had no idea that the expense of coming to the District of Columbia for a month at trial. So it was those Steyn Online Liberty Sticks that did in fact. Otherwise, I'd have had to cop a plea on the second day of the trial or whatever. Do you know what the prices are of a decent cocktail at even a mid-level chain hotel in this town? It's sick. So I'm going to insist, if I'm in any other suit, that the controlling jurisdiction is New Hampshire, where you can't get cocktails at all in the entire state, and it's like $30 a night at the motel or whatever. But yeah, that's very nice of Dr. Nobody wants to become, and this is true, I think, for everyone who's been caught up like in this stuff like this. Rudy Giuliani was an American hero 20 years ago. Now he's destroyed. He's destroyed. His current lady, his paramour, as they used to say about Peter Strzok, was actually lived down the road from me in New Hampshire. And when she met Rudy, she was delighted to be able to hit the big time and come to New York and be on the radio with him. And in the whatever it is, the 2 or 3 years since that happened, Rudy has lost everything because we are criminalizing opposition. And there are 200 countries in the world, and they basically divide into those where political opposition is not criminalized, or those countries where you're in the political opposition because you have no free speech and they throw you into jail on the slightest pretext. The only kind of political opposition involves lobbing Molotov cocktails through windows. And America is actually on the continuum to that. If you criminalize political opposition, which is very advanced here now. I listened to an NPR report in the taxi the other day, and they talk about, for example, the latest assassination attempt on the president, only in terms of the uses the Republican Party and the MAGA Trump crowd are making of it. It's not the uses of it. You know, in Pennsylvania, he took a bullet, and he's one of a very select number of presidents who've taken a bullet for his country. And he is not admitted to the pantheon of Kennedy and McKinley and Lincoln and Garfield. He's taken a bullet in his ear, and they make jokes about it. Mrs. Vindman, whose husband is the Democrat candidate for Congress in this very state, is doing jokes about it. You know, it's a dark continuum, and and the thing about it is, it's incredibly difficult to find a way back. You know, it's very easy. It's very easy to go over the cliff. It's a lot harder to actually get back onto the top of it. You don't want to go there. There's a gentleman here, I think.
So you did a phenomenal job this evening explaining the problem, a serious problem, highlighting it through your experiences. I was wondering, if you were king for the day, how might you solve this problem of a land of legalism that we seem to have fallen into?
Well, I would break up the Department of Justice for a start. You know, I probably shouldn't say this, but after what the FBI, I know a little bit about the Five Eyes intelligence thing, which is basically America with four of King Charles's realms, Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Basically, the FBI offshored the subversion of the 2016 election to its Five Eyes allies, including a friend of mine, the then Australian High Commissioner in London. I know Americans don't know what a High Commissioner is, but it's a bit like a Commonwealth version of an ambassador, except that if you're just a lousy old American ambassador, when you go to the palace to present your credentials, they just send a coach and 2 horses, whereas if you're the Canadian High Commissioner, they send a coach with 4 horses. This is important. If you ever do any of these kind of bar trivia quizzes, this could come up. So he's the Australian High Commissioner, and he basically arranges to have a drink with a nobody called George Papadopoulos to get the goods on him at a London wine bar. And the FBI subversion of the election is enough for me. Now, that's before the entrapment on January the 6th. It's before the FACO case against Gretsch and Whitmer. My friends on Fox, they say, oh, well, yes, there may be 1 or 2 rotten apples there, but the rest of them, I know these men, they're straight-shooting G-men, Granite Jaw G-men, straight out of some 1950s crime drama. I'm with them all the way. No, they're not. The FBI is rotten from top to toe, and it's got to go. The Secret Service cannot be as bad. I realize I'm becoming a pain in the neck and saying that being a Canadian High Commissioner is better than being an American ambassador and everything. I don't want to go too far down that road. But my daughter and I saw the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh in Glasgow in 2012. They had 2 Scottish police constables as their security detail at that big open-air event. But those 2 Scottish coppers would have taken a bullet for the Queen or the Duke of Edinburgh. You look, anyone who knows anything about the Secret Service knows it's bloated and incompetent and morally depraved. The phrase Cartagena hookers, any Cartagena hookers in the room tonight? The phrase Cartagena hookers entered the language because the advanced Secret Service team sent to Cartagena did nothing except pleasure themselves with the Cartagena hookers. And the only reason it came out was because one of the Secret Service granite-jawed, straight-shooting guys got into an argument in the corridor because the hooker said her normal rates were whatever they were like $500, and he said he was willing to pay her $37. By the way, that guy should be running the economic policy of the United States government. I wish there was a bit more of that. Nelson Mandela's funeral, they did the usual money, no object thing. They got the Air Force One, they got the decoy Air Force One, they've got the 137-car motorcade, and they get President Obama all the way to the stadium and then stick him standing 3 feet away from that fake interpreter for the blind, if you recall, who was just doing gibberish. And for the deaf, was just doing all the gibberish, and who had actually been convicted of what they call in South Africa necklacing, which means taking a tire, putting soaked in gasoline over somebody's head and then setting it alight. And the Secret Service, money no object, 147-car motorcade, put the president next to that guy. Because they figured to hell with the Cartagena hookers, we'll go now try the Cape Town hookers. Now, the United States Congress responded as they always do. They passed a law making it illegal for a Secret Service agent to be in his room with a foreign national. You wonder why these guys are rubbish? It's like it's illegal for me to be in a hotel room with a Secret Service agent, and it's illegal for the Cartagena hooker, but it's perfectly acceptable for the Secret Service agent to be in his room with a hooker from, say, Arlington, Virginia. That's okay. This is rubbish. You know, your candidate, urgency is the issue here. We're going off the cliff. And so I think a minimum is to say the Secret Service is beyond repair. We have to abolish it and start again. Same, and break up the Department of Justice too.
Please join me in thanking Mr. Steyn.